Hi, this is Paul. A number of weeks ago, I had a conversation with someone who was on the Abide committee, and she said, "Oh, you should talk to Aaron Vriesman." And I was just looking at the name Vriesman, and actually, she sent me a bunch of timelines that you made. They're really interesting. This little hobby of yours. Um,
Really? Oh, yes. I'm kind of a history nerd, and I like to accumulate information, and that's easily accessible later. And so I found that timelines are a way to do that. So yeah, I have various timelines for various reasons. Yes.
Very cool. Well, let's what I usually do with these conversations is we'll spend a while talking about your life and your story, and then we'll go wherever the conversation goes. And because we're sort of on the eve of Synod right now, we can talk about the Christian Reformed Church. My channel, which is mostly not Christian Reformed, says seemed to take a very strange interest in the drama and the drama of the Christian Reformed Church right now, probably because it's not unlike drama going on in other places. So, um,
Yeah, I follow your channel. I watch the ones that are specifically relevant to the Christian Reformed Church, and I appreciate being on here. So
all right, thank you, Aaron. Well, talk to me a little bit about the home you grew up in.
yeah, so let's see. I had a mom and a dad. I have a sister who's 2 years younger, and a brother who's 13 years younger.
Mm,
And I was homeschooled kindergarten through 12th grade.
really
Um, yeah.
interesting.
And I went to community college for a year, then Calvin, then college to graduate for undergrad. Um, we grew up, or I grew up in the Muskegon area. I went to Calvin Church in Muskegon. Pretty much all the Vriesmans were part of that church at least at one point.
Is now I know
Um,
some Freeze Muzz. Is this an Ellis Island thing? Did some worker at Ellis Island tack an N on? What's the deal with Vriesma and Vriesman?
all right, so the story is if you go back into the Vriesman family tree, um, we'll find that we're not from Friesland, we're from Groningen.
Oh,
Somebody told me once that if your last name ends with an A, you're from Friesland. If your last name ends with an N, you're from Groningen. And so if you look back, all of the people on the Vriesman side all were born, married, or died in Groningen somewhere. So,
interesting.
so how we got the name, I'm not really sure.
Well,
Um,
you
but
know, Vries, it's people from, but yeah, they added the end, so you're from Groningen. Oh, that's interesting.
apparently, yes.
Some
So, and
Hollander will watch this and leave a very detailed comment or send me a long email explaining the
oh,
whole thing.
really?
It might even be a Vendonk, so we'll I'll not worry about that. So now this is really interesting because you grew up in Muskegon in a CRC.
Yep.
The expected path, which was my path, would be you would go to a Christian school,
Yes.
but you were homeschooled.
Yes. My
Why?
dad went to my dad went to West Michigan Christian, and my cousins did as well. Um, but my parents were on the conservative side, and they heard about some things that the Christian school was teaching. They weren't too happy about that. My mom was a public school teacher, and decided that she wanted to stay home and teach her kids.
Okay.
So my mom was a certified teacher when she was teaching me, even though her certification expired, and then in Michigan it was technically illegal to do that. Um,
Wow.
um, so yeah, we didn't answer the phone before 3:30,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
we had standard things to say if we were out and about, that kind of thing.
Wow. My
Yeah.
my wife and I, we homeschooled our five kids here in
Oh, did you?
California. Yeah, we didn't have any, there wasn't a Christian school. Well, there was a Lutheran school that some people in church sent their kids to, but there wasn't a Christian school developed by Christian Reformed churches. They're, not enough of a colony area for that. And my
Okay.
wife actually got her teaching credential because California was sort of, making noises about, uncredentialed teachers. And so, yeah, I know all about that kind of thing. What
Yes.
did you think of homeschooling?
You know, there was there were there's advantages and drawbacks to whatever schooling you should decide to do. I enjoyed it. I appreciated it. The one-on-one attention was great. There was a lot of opportunities to kind of go where my interests were.
Yeah.
So I took a lot of philosophy classes. I took logic in 8th grade and government classes and lots of history. I really liked that. So lots of humanities that we got to focus on because of that, and lots of Bible. Was well educated in scripture.
Well, those
So
timelines and outlines that you make, they now make a ton of sense because, one of the things, so my kids at some point transitioned, my oldest son, he really wanted to play basketball. And so he transitioned to a
okay,
public school so he could play varsity basketball. And, one of the things at some point, all of my kids transitioned to public schools. And one of the things that they noted, and we really noted for them, because my wife is a public school teacher too, is that my kids in 2, 3 hours of sit down work would basically cover everything. And after that, they could do all kinds of stuff. If they were interested in this, they could read about that. We had what we called constructive free time. And you can really, you can really develop and grow homeschooling in a way that, a structured school environment, whether it be Christian or public, you just can't facilitate that with all of those kids. How did your mother keep up with, you're talking about logic and philosophy. She just like use the internet to find resources and keep shoveling things your way, or?
there were homeschool conventions that she went to. There were various sets of curriculum that you could use, and so she would pick out. She kind of would search through and find one that she liked. So yeah, it was. Um, yeah, I wasn't up on all of the decision process of what curriculum she chose and why, but I know that she would search around and say, okay, this one looks good, let's use that one.
Okay.
So
What was it like? What was it like going to church and for friend groups in terms of homeschooling for you?
yeah, so half the kids went to the public school and the other half went to the Christian school, and then there was me. So I didn't really fit in with either group, but I had lots of family there. So
Oh, okay.
my cousin, who's pretty much my same age, he and I were best friends,
Yeah.
and so we would hang out a lot. We went to cadets together. We would be in Sunday school together,
Yeah.
and all of that. Um, so the family involvement was helpful for having those connections.
For those of you who are watching, when he said cadets, that's
Oh,
the
sorry.
Christian Reformed Church has a paramilitary youth program. It's called cadets. I participated in the Christian Reformed Church paramilitary youth program. If people are going to be suspicious, we
Paramilitary.
might as well feed their little suspicions, because
Oh,
we
that's
had
funny.
uniforms and we had badges. It was really a Christian Reformed knockoff of Boy Scouts, but
Yes, it's Boy Scouts. Yes.
but it was but when
Oh
you hear
man.
Freddie, some people watch the Freddie and Paul show. When you hear Freddie talk about loyal, faithful, industrious, cheerful, Freddie was a cadet, and so you learned all of the cadet pledge and all of these things. I don't know how much of that went down all the way to the time you were there, but that's those are cadets. Those are cadets.
Yes, that is the cadet thing.
Well, that's good because the homeschool, you could sort of nerd out and do stuff. You had family around, and of course, you had cadets, so you could, continue to build relationships in church. What was as a kid? What was church like for you? Did you like it? Did you not like it? How did you feel about church?
Yeah, it was mostly something that lots of grown-ups did when I was a kid, and through, I would say, most of my adult life, I just sort of thought church is kind of like a religious club.
Hmm.
And as I grew older into my teens, I kind of became cynical about it.
Hmm.
And some of this is a homeschooling thing, you're kind of anti-establishment and such. We found a lot of kindred spirits in the homeschool group, which included Pentecostals, other non-denominationals, Baptists, some Catholics, and so that was the primary spiritual community that I grew up in.
Okay.
So the broadly evangelical uh, sense of things is kind of that resonates a lot with me.
Okay.
Um,
Uh,
but yeah,
well, I don't want to jump too far ahead in the story, but at
okay.
what age did you have a sense of call to the ministry?
Well, um, I'll say in college.
All right, so let's hold off there. We'll get
Okay.
to that when we get to college.
All right. Sounds good.
Anything else about, so did your parents didn't move around? You grew up your whole life in one place?
We lived in Norton Shores, which is right next to Muskegon, until I was 7. We moved to Spring Lake, which is maybe 20 minutes away.
Oh yeah.
Um, but we still went to the same church because all the family was
Yeah.
there and everything. We'd get together for coffee afterwards. It was great. Then we moved up north to Hart, and we transferred to New Era Christian Reformed Church.
Oh, okay.
And that's outside of the West Michigan bubble there. It's a different culture up there.
So what was that
Um,
like for you? I mean, especially, I mean, with homeschooling, you're sort of really tied into the nuclear family, but it sounds like you
yep.
had real good connections. So did that sort of put you even a little further outside, or were you able to, did you just do more driving?
That move was rough for me.
Mm,
It was great in a lot of ways for my family. But for me it was rough. Before, when we were in Spring Lake, I was on a baseball team, I was on soccer teams, I was into martial arts, Taekwondo specifically, and we had a bike path, we had neighborhood friends,
yeah,
and then up in Hart, none of that
yeah,
existed. So
yeah.
that was hard. That was a hard time for me.
I visited Spring Lake recently because that's where my great grandfather immigrated to the United States and then brought his parents and a disabled brother over, and they settled in Spring Lake. And then
Is that right?
my great grandmother died in childbirth, giving birth to her sixth child in about, I think it was probably about 1915. I'd have to check my records. And then then he had to move to Grand Rapids with his 6 kids, and eventually married a sister-in-law who first came to she wasn't biologically related to her. It was his deceased wife's deceased brother's widow. And when he moved to Grand Rapids, but no, so I visited Spring Lake a couple summers ago just because I was looking for headstones of family members, and
Oh,
it was kind of a fun.
yes.
And I had never been to Spring Lake or paid much attention, and so we sort of drove around there. But my great great grandfather was sort of a famous Dutchman who he was a character. He was the one probably got kicked out of the Jewish community and told his 18-year-old son to brave the North Atlantic and go to West Michigan and do everything so they could come over. So anyway, family
Really?
stories. Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting story. But they were Jews, and
Oh, that's interesting.
yeah, and I found, so when I was in the Netherlands a couple summers ago, I found where all the Van der Kleis were from, and we did for a long time. We didn't know we had Jewish roots, but because my great great grandfather married a Dutch woman, that's probably why he got kicked out. They came to America, and so basically the family tree here survived, and the family tree all there was wiped out by the Holocaust. So
So you are biologically related to Abraham and to David and to all of the people that we read about in the Bible. That's really cool.
yeah, if well, of course, if I talk to my Jewish friends, they say, yeah, but your mother wasn't Jewish, so sorry for you. So
Oh, really?
for
Oh,
so from the Y chromosome, yes. Uh
okay.
but then my father married a Frisian girl at Calvin, so So, I'm, yeah, I've got a lot in me. Anyway, so yeah, Spring Lakes, I was just up there. And okay,
Nice.
so, all the way K through 12 homeschooled. And then what was, you decide, did you shop around for colleges, or was Calvin like the only option?
Well, I went to Muskegon Community College my first
Oh,
year.
that's right. You said that.
I it was well, first of all, it was like $45 a credit hour versus,
Yeah.
versus, the alternatives. And they didn't really know what I wanted to do yet.
Yeah.
So I just thought I'd start there. My cousin Nathan was going there, and so I was good friends with him, and he was going to transfer to Calvin the next year. I visited with him. I thought it sounded fun, so I decided to go there, and we roomed together throughout our undergrad years.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah,
So how was Calvin for you?
I liked it. I had good experiences there. I really enjoyed it. Um,
What did you major in?
I was a double major in philosophy and psychology.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So I really liked the philosophy department. The rigor, being able to have textbooks that were written by your professors
Yeah.
is just really cool. Have I had Steve Evans for Kierkegaard, and he would just drop Danish words and lecture without any notes. And so I don't know, I just loved that. And psychology was just fascinating to me as well. So I decided to major in those two things and see where that went. And ministry kind of slowly presented
Well,
itself
talk
out of
about
that.
that process a little bit.
So ministry was always kind of on the list, um, but it was always at the bottom of the list, um, just because I,
Psychology, philosophy, not big, well, I guess maybe a therapist, but it's the application of those two are,
yeah, I mean, it's not like engineering or business or teaching where you
right.
got jobs lined up for you. But I liked studying the material, and being a homeschooler, I learn what I want to learn.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
was the that was maybe the hardest transition going to a regular school is, why do I have to learn what the professors want me to learn? I want to learn what I want to learn. So, anyways, um, but um, but yeah, I had a pastor from New Era, Larry Barr, who first kind of suggested it to me, so it kind of made the list. Um, but the one who really got me to take it seriously was my now wife, and she was like, "Well, what about ministry?" Because I was talking with her about what to do afterwards, and
Usually the women push you in the other direction because they're like, I don't know if I want to be a minister's wife, but is
yeah,
this what she wanted to be?
not really. She wasn't looking to be that, um, but she just sort of thought, knowing you, it makes sense. So I decided to talk to all of the people that I respected. So I talked to the chaplain at Calvin College. I talked to Norm Meyer was my pastor at Calvin Church in Muskegon. So I talked to him. He was at Brookside at the time. I talked to Larry Barr, my pastor in New Era. I talked to my parents, my grandparents, and other professors, anybody who I just respected at the time. And absolutely everyone said you should go for it.
Oh, how did you
So
meet your wife at Calvin?
my wife went to Hope, actually. Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
traitor to the cause.
I know it. I know it.
Well, how did you meet her?
So the friend of mine who lived across the hall from me, his friend went to Calvin Christian, and his friend he knew from Calvin Christian in Granville, she went to Hope, and she was my wife's friend. So mutual friends introduced us.
Oh, nice.
Um, but yeah, so but she was the one who first put that out there, and then I started exploring, and yeah, that's kind of just one door kind of opened up after another there, and
So
all the
did you
other doors
decide in
closed.
time to get your 2 years of Greek in before you went to seminary? Maybe they changed that by the time you went through.
I was coming in at the tail end of that, so that's
Okay.
one of the reasons. that I ended up at Western Seminary in
Oh,
Holland
oh,
instead of Calvin.
talk to me about that. What was it, the
They had
Greek prerequisite?
that was part of it.
Okay.
They had Greek built into the curriculum, whereas Calvin, I had to have 2 years of Greek before going in.
Right.
Um, and yeah, I also another thing was I didn't know what it meant to be CRC. Like,
Hmm.
what does that mean? What does it mean to be CRC versus RCA? And so I thought, well, maybe I'll get an outside the box experience. Just try something different instead of going to Calvin College, Calvin Seminary, Calvin
Yeah.
College. Let's try something different. So I thought I would.
Oh,
Um,
interesting. So talk to me about your experience at Western. This is getting even more interesting.
okay. Um, Western, I met a lot of great people, friends that I'm still friends with to
I
this
should
day.
probably say for most listeners, people might imagine that Western is someplace in Oregon.
Oh, no.
Western Seminary, Holland, Michigan. It's in
Yes.
Western Michigan. So that's
Yes.
it's a seminary from the Reformed Church in America, not the Christian Reformed Church. So anyway, go on. I'm
Yes.
sorry.
So I was kind of always on the uh, for lack of a better word, conservative end of the CRC. And I thought, well, if I go to a seminary, which is typically, usually more on the liberal end of a denomination, maybe I'll get challenged. Um, and I was expecting the kind of debates that we had in philosophy about, we would kind of, just have these debates about what Kierkegaard was saying or what Kant was saying, um, and whether it made sense or not. But I found that you can't have friendly debates about theological things, that it got
Really?
really personal really quick. And
Wow.
so I found that I had to keep my mouth shut and my head down a lot.
Huh.
There were a couple times when I came out of the closet as complementarian, and I got daggers stared at me,
Mm.
I just denied the Trinity or something like that. Um, yeah, it was. I had to be really careful about who I said who I shared that with.
Was that from the
Um,
students or faculty as well?
I had one professor avoid me after
Hmm.
learning that I was complementarian.
Really?
Yeah. Um,
Not a
and
safe, not in a Western, not a safe place for complementarians, apparently.
I hear it's different today than it was back then.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I was I I was laughed at times. I
Oh,
had a
wow.
hand stuck in my face and doors slam and other
Really?
things like that. Yeah, it was for a sensitive, thin-skinned kind of guy. It was there were some rough moments there.
Oh my. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's disappointing to hear, frankly. Because anybody who watches my channel knows that I want people to have productive conversations about things they disagree with. I think you really need to.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you're convinced of your belief, if you can't figure out how to have um friendly, amiable, productive relationships that can afford conversations about differences, you're not even helping your own cause. You're just hardening lines, and that's so I'm sorry to hear that. I'm really sorry to hear that, and I hope if
There,
someone listens to this who was part of that making that a really unhealthy space for you, that they maybe send you a little private note and apologize, because I think that's actually a pretty serious thing, especially these denominational seminaries are their primary mission is to prepare clergy for their denominations. But at the same time, I think almost any denomination in this pluralist context that we work in should probably form its students to have conversations with people that they disagree with, because there's a lot to disagree with in a big world like this. So
yes, I and I should say that I did I did find a few people who were willing to have those conversations
Good.
or
Good.
willing to do that.
So,
But I had to be very careful.
so did you get your whole MDiv at Western, or did you do part there and go to CTS?
No, I got my MDiv at Western, and then I did the year of penance at Calvin Seminary,
Okay.
is what they called it at the time.
Yeah.
Um, and I had a good experience at Calvin Seminary. I when I was at Western Seminary, the Heidelberg Catechism was mentioned twice, or it was in our curriculum, our content maybe twice, usually around the sacraments. Belgian Confession once with the sacraments. We never talked about the canons of Dort, not once. But then I go to Calvin, and suddenly there's a whole class on the confessions. There's a whole class on confessional preaching, and my family kind of came out of the pietist stream of the Christian Reformed Church. So personal piety and faith was really important. Our spiritual disciplines were important. But I never really discovered the confessions until I went to Calvin Seminary and had a class on them with Lyle Bierma.
Oh, okay.
He just going through the confessions with him. That's when I realized, boy, this is great stuff. I never really dove into this or appreciated this that much. So that's where I fell in love with the confessions.
Very cool. At what point in this whole journey did you marry your wife?
I got married the week after I finished at Calvin College, and
That's
and
for
just
those
a
who are
few months.
listening. That's when I went to Calvin. That was pretty typical for many. I wasn't there. I had to do a 5th year at Calvin, and then I didn't marry my wife into 2 years into the seminary. But that's pretty standard in the Christian Reformed Church. At least it used to be. I don't know, it still is. I was one of very few male students at Calvin Seminary who were unmarried, and so PCs were very new at that point. So I'd find myself in the seminary computer room typing with Nigerian students often. So okay, so you went all through seminary married.
Yes.
What was your field ed like with Western? Did you work in any churches while you were in seminary?
Yeah, this was another reason why Western was attractive, is that Calvin had a 4-year program with 1 year, an internship.
Right.
And Western had a concurrent internship all 3 years that you were there, as
Okay.
well as a summer internship.
Okay.
So I interned at Calvary CRC in Holland with Frank Weavers, and I learned a lot from him, had a good experience there. So
that was concurrent. That was your whole 3 years in one church.
Yes.
Oh, that's good. And Calvin does that now too. I mean, Calvin has continued to tinker with it to make it a little bit more student friendly and accessible than, when I went, it was pretty, that was even before the accrediting people came in and looked at the curriculum and said, you're asking way too much of students. You need to lop this off. Mark Van Heitzma, who's currently in Olympia, Washington, he did a year and Kevin Adams, another friend of mine, they did a year at Fuller. And my friend, while I was at Calvin Seminary, working to the wee hours of the morning, trying to bear up under the load, Mark Van Heitzma was saying, the Fuller Seminary the library closes at 10 p.m. out here. And it's like, so, what was your seminary field ed your first experience of ministry in a church, or had you done some in high school? Or you weren't in high school, but so that was your first experience of church ministry then?
Yes.
What
Yeah,
kind of stuff
that
did you do
was.
in the church?
I did some visiting. I did some teaching of junior high. That was kind of rough. I'm not a junior high teacher. Crowd control of children is a difficult thing for me. My most terrifying week of ministry, even to this day, is the week of Vacation Bible School. Yeah. How to keep kids' attention. That just that's very stressful. But anyways, it usually goes well, but I just, yeah, I stress about it.
So,
Anyways, yeah, and I did a preaching just maybe occasionally in the evening in the smaller crowd. But I did meet with Frank for an hour every week, and so
okay.
he would talk to me about ministry and his ministry philosophy, and lots of other things. So
So you do the EPMC, otherwise known as the Year of Penance at Calvin Seminary, and then you get into the calling process. And how was that for you?
you know, I did. Calvin Seminary had me do basically 9 months of an internship, and I served Oakwood, CRC, and Belding. And that was kind of where I really got my feet under me in terms of ministry, and doing 2 sermons a week and visiting people and dealing with people or helping people going through some really challenging times. Yeah, that was that was kind of where I got my confidence. And then the calling process, yeah, this place where I am now, I just
So
just
where
kind
do
of
you serve
came.
now?
Yeah, sorry. I serve in North Blendon Christian Reformed Church in Hudsonville, Michigan. Actually, we have a Hudsonville address. We're in Zeeland School District and an Allendale phone number, so we kind of are in the middle here.
Okay.
But yeah, this congregation contacted me, and I I decided they asked me to preach for them, so I did that. They interviewed me, so I did that, and then there was a call letter, and I accepted. So
Okay.
my wife was teaching in West Ottawa public schools, and this is really close, so she's able to keep her job there, and that worked out really well. And that was 18 and a half years ago already.
Well,
So
tell me about the church. When was it started? And a little bit a little
yeah.
bit of the history of your church.
So North Blendon CRC started in 1910. It was a church plant off of First Allendale when Louis Burkhoff was a pastor there, actually. Um, and it's North Blendon is a country church, farming community, and or at least historically it is. Lots of dairy farmers in the area, or at least historically so. Um, and these are just solid people that they love their families, they love their church, and they just want to serve the Lord, and they just look for a pastor to get up there and give it to me straight. What is the Bible saying, and what does that mean? And so I've had I've occasionally thrown my name into the hat for some other churches, but I haven't been in a hurry to leave because the people are just really good here.
Good.
And so,
Good.
yeah.
How many are in attendance on Sunday morning generally?
Oh, I'd say about 150 to 200.
Okay. Okay. So it's a smallish, medium-sized church.
Yeah.
Over 100, less than 1,000. So
Yes.
okay.
Yes, exactly.
Um, what now? Actually, when I was in seminary, part of our field ed was they farmed us out to teach catechism. And I would
Oh,
drive out to Hudsonville every Sunday morning. I'd teach a catechism class, and I think it was Emmanuel CRC in Hudsonville.
oh, sure. Yep.
I taught catechism to a group of kids there. I had done a lot of teaching by the time, even before I went to seminary. We had at Northside Chapel, we had a day camp program, so I was a day camp counselor. So I didn't have a week of VBS. I had a month of VBS every summer where I had my own class. So I was well used to teaching children, which put me in good stead when we had to homeschool. But
Yes.
um, how has the now even when I was in Calvin, Hudsonville was farming. Now my mother-in-law, my wife's mother, she eventually bought a condo and in Hudsonville, and so Hudsonville has really had a transformation from what had been farming into suburbs. Um, now some of that would probably be a little bit before you went there, but how has that impacted the church? Do you have any farmers left, or
There,
how has that impacted the church? Because that will impact the church. It's a very different population, farmers and
yes,
suburbanites.
yes. That is kind of where we are right now. We're in Blendon Township, which when I came here was zoned a certain way so that to try to keep it farming community as much as possible. And since then, that has changed. There used to be able to cross into the next township, which is Georgetown Township, and suddenly there were subdivisions everywhere. And now those subdivisions are starting to form in Blendon Township. We're about halfway between Grand Rapids and Holland, Michigan, and so you have farmhouses and houses that are 100 years old right next to these brand new, no expense spared houses. There's easily twice as many houses on both streets that surround this church than when I first came here. There's easily twice as many houses. And these are different sorts of communities, and they're different kinds of people. So that's a challenge. Our neighborhood is changing, and what does it mean to try to reach people like that? But we still are. I think of it as like we're an old-fashioned country church, where everybody knows everybody. Your church is a second family. We pray for each other. We help each other. We make meals for each other. We do potlucks together, and so we've kind of kept the small town country church sort of feel to us.
When you started ministry there, what surprised you when you got into now ministry as a job?
What surprised me? That's I've never thought about that. I nothing really stands out as a surprise. Maybe I'll put it. Maybe I'll answer it this way. God's faithfulness, I guess, has always surprised me. I I never really put ministry at the top of my list because I'm thin skinned and I have struggles with depression and I'm kind of insecure. And everything I knew about being a pastor was that you're going to get a lot of criticism. You're going to get a lot of people putting pressure on you. And I went into this just trusting God and just hoping that God was going to make a way, and He really has. Um, I look back on 18 years and think, man, there's no way that I did this by myself with my
Mm.
weaknesses. Um, this could only be God.
Mm.
And so my faith has really grown in that way. And I guess in one way it's been a surprise at
Mm.
how God has been faithful in that. So
Um, what classes is your church a part of?
church is part of Classis Zealand.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
How has your experience in Classis been? Classis Zealand is, I think, Lloyd maybe is raising the
Mhm.
visibility of Classis Zealand. As the, I mean, Minn Kota sort of arranged itself as an affinity classis in the denomination, and maybe Classis Zealand is gonna rival them. I don't know, but how has your experience been in classis?
Um, when I first came here, it was a very divided Classis.
Really?
Yeah, it was about half were complementarian and about the other half were egalitarian, women in
Okay.
office. And there were there were there were definite party lines.
Really?
And
Interesting.
I would kind of float between both of them. But not many people would. And so I was on a classes renewal committee, and one thing that we decided to do is we decided to have the classes be be organized with different committees. We made one committee that was just responsible. We called it Classis Koinonia, so Classis Fellowship, and so we started doing retreats together. We started having pastors and spouses outings, and we started having coffee together every week, and it's a whole different Classis now.
Wow.
We are friends with each other. We don't always see eye to eye on everything, but we pray for each other. We encourage each other. We have Classis coffee every Wednesday morning, and not everybody comes, but most people come with some frequency, and we just have excellent camaraderie now.
That's
It's a great
wonderful.
Classis.
That is
Yeah.
great to hear.
Yes.
Because if I ask a minister about Classis, I sort of brace myself because, there's a joke among CRC ministers that, I work in my local church for free. I get paid twice a year to go to Classis. But so this is super helpful because part of what happens, especially on the fringe of the CRC, is that you see these names on overtures, and so you get sort of stereotypes. And of course, that has happened to Classis Grand Rapids East in many ways. And many of my friends in Classis Grand Rapids East will say, we're not exactly how we look from through certain lenses in the denomination. And so I tend to get that impression now talking to you about Classis Zealand as well.
Yeah, it's a great Classis to be a part of. I've really appreciated and enjoyed the fellowship that we have. And again, it doesn't mean that we agree on everything, and we have some different styles of ministry, and we
Yep.
have some different ideas about some things, but
Yep.
Classis meetings go so much better when you know each other's struggles and you've prayed for one another, when you've encouraged one another, you've seen each other's ups and downs in ministry,
Yep.
and so even if somebody comes off a little strong on a Classis floor, the person behind it,
Yep.
and
Yep.
so you're not threatened by it,
Yep.
by somebody coming off a little strong. You know that they're passionate about this, and so
Yep.
you can work with that.
Which is exactly the reason why I do these longer bios with these conversations, because someone might say, oh, Paul is talking to someone from Abide, or Paul is talking to Clay Leibold. And then people are, then they have this straw man picture of different people. And in almost every single case, when you begin to wade into a person's life and their story, you realize, oh, there's a whole person in there. What do you know?
Yep.
And so what you say is exactly right with respect to ministry. Part of the difference in West Michigan is that Classis geographically are compressed as compared to, let's say, a place like Northern California. Currently, we used to have a church in Wairika, which was 4 hours north of me, and we have churches 4 hours south of me. In other words, it would require 8 hours to drive from one end of Classis to another. And that's not unusual in Classis out in the western part of the United States, which really makes Classis a very different thing than Classis can be in a place like Western Michigan, where you can meet every week, because geographically, I would imagine, Zealand, I would imagine, isn't a small Classis, because you do have some real estate there, but it's not like Northern California. So
No, we're a long, narrow strip. If you know Western Michigan, we go from Coopersville to Allendale. We're the only Hudsonville one there, but then Zealand, and then down to Oakland, over Rysel, and down to Allegan.
okay.
So we're kind of a long, narrow strip, but we kind of, Zealand's in the middle. We kind of meet in the middle for a lot of things. So yeah, but it's a good Classis.
That's interesting, because there's another issue with Classis in the Christian Reformed churches, that they're historical. And so I grew up in New Jersey, where we had Classis Hackensack and Classis Hudson. And of
Yeah.
course, Classis Hackensack was sort of a weird Classis, because it kind of came over as such in the early days, then added some churches, and then Classis Hudson. And of course, you've got RCA churches around. And I mean, every place is different. So, but I'm super glad to hear that story about Classis Zealand, because that's really helpful for me to get a much more accurate picture of what's there. And that, again, in terms of the current conflict in the Christian Reformed Church, one of the things I really do want to do is, as much as possible, let's humanize each other and understand that while, we may be fairly far apart on specific issues, let's say in the church, we've got probably a whole lot more in common than we do that. Well, see, you can't measure these things like you can sort of measure with a yardstick, or measure with some a measuring cup. So, well, okay, so talk to me about Abide. So Abide, it came about. I first heard about Abide when I was charged by my classes to visit First Ripon, who were in the process of leaving the denomination, and my job was to go and make what everyone agreed would be a futile attempt, but yet a well-meant attempt, and I think appreciated attempt on the part of First Ripon, to go to their congregational meeting where they were going to vote to leave the denomination. And so I had sort of a pastor on more conservative side of the Classis. I'm on the more progressive side of the Classis. So, kind of, okay, here we have two sides of Classis coming to you, even though I'm sure many people out there will say, Paul Vanderklay's on the progressive side of a Classis. Can't believe that. But then I remember we were talking to people at the congregational meeting, and someone said, have you heard of the Abide Project? No, I haven't. And then it was, I don't remember even the first time I heard about the Abide Project. When were you part of the ground floor of that, or how did that thing sort of evolve?
Well, we started out, there were a bunch of us that were just concerned about the direction of the denomination. Neil and Avenue had recently ordained someone in a same-sex marriage. The human sexuality report was coming out. So we decided to kind of get together on Zoom and just start talking. And what we found is that there was interest in.
Now, in terms of who was it? Friends from seminary, or people?
Let's see. I think
Returning Church was, because Returning Church was before Abide. Returning Church had, been on a Facebook group for a while.
Returning Church is a Facebook group. Anybody can comment and have a discussion. Yep. So, yep. You can tell when people are concerned in a discussion group. But I think, if I remember correctly, Chad Steenwick had just sent out an email invite to a bunch of people. We're going to meet at this time. Let's just get together and talk. We decided to talk again. There was interest in doing more things like starting a website, publishing articles. So we decided to form a steering team and some teams to manage some of these activities, and that's kind of how it got started. That's the short version of how it got started. Anyway.
If I were to come to you and say, tell me what the Abide Project is, how would you answer that question?
The Abide Project is a grassroots movement within the CRC that wants to see the Christian Reformed Church remain steadfast on marriage and sexuality. That would be how I would describe it.
Did the group just sort of, is that focus on marriage and sexuality an accident of Abide's birth, or has the group come to a degree of self-consciousness by which it says, this is the focus of our group, and so when we feel that this issue is resolved, the group disbands? Or is it just unclear at this point?
There's many comments by many people saying we would love to work ourselves out of a job and to disband. We would love that. Whether that will be realized or not, it depends on how synods go and that sort of thing. But we would We would love to not need to exist.
Yeah.
Yes.
It would seem that most of the battle has been won in some ways. What do you think would make would in the minds of, at least, of course you can't speak for all of these people because it's a
No,
grassroots level,
it
everybody's
is.
going to have different takes.
And they
It's
do.
and they do, I'm sure they do. I'm sure it's a fairly loose organization. You know, you've certainly got you it's I appreciate the fact that you've been open in terms of, okay, these are a group of people that we can put our names down and say we're, um what do you think, would there be an event or a decision or a milestone at which you think the group would say, mission accomplished, let's give Abide a happy burial?
Um, Again, it's hard to speak for a lot of different
And
people
anything
in a
that you say
grassroots
is not
movement.
speaking for the group, we'll say that, because
All right.
anybody that wants to email me, you can find my email address in this CRC yearbook. It's right there. Or you want to message me or leave a comment, that's fine. Correcting Aaron. We're not going to put the weight of Abide on Aaron.
Well, that's
But
good. I appreciate that. If I had to guess, I would say that if the denomination can have a unified view of marriage and sexuality, Abide would disband.
do you think, well, at this point, obviously there are some in the denomination that don't share, let's say, the view of the Human Sexuality Report, but part of what we saw in Synod 2022 and 2023 was a broad consensus on embracing, if not the details and particulars, at least the spirit of the Human Sexuality Report, which would be, say, we want the church to continue to maintain the a confessional posture with respect to traditional marriage and sexuality. And with two synods now, the votes aren't even close. Obviously, the question of gravamen will be dealt with at this synod. There's going to be questions of, okay, how does the church discipline? What in your mind would signal for you? Again, I'm sort of repeating the question. That, I mean, would there be an event? Because would certain churches have to leave? Would it be, let's say, perhaps the establishment of an alternative Christian Reformed church where affirming churches could go? And again, you can't answer, but for you personally, I'll frame it that way. For you personally, what might happen in the future that you would say, because you're a pastor of a church, you've got a job to do. Abide isn't paying your salary. And at some point, you're going to want to say, hey, I didn't sign up for a life sentence to Abide. I'm done with it for now. So what would signal for you that, in a sense, this issue is resolved in the Christian Reformed Church?
If there was a separation of some kind, where people could actually be honest about their differences and realize how severe these differences are and go their separate ways, that would be significant. I really believe, and I think that the history of denominations bears us out really well, that these are two views that cannot work together. Even just considering from, if I'm wrong about marriage and sexuality, I'm a horrible person. I'm not just mistaken. I'm a horrible person. I'm on par with a racist, really. And I am shutting the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. I am not letting them enter. I'm putting up a bunch of rules that don't need to be there. So what I just can't, I think that any attempt to try to resolve the differences that are on marriage and sexuality is a fool's errand. It's not going to work. And if you can see that in the Presbyterian Church USA, you can see it in the Church of the Brethren, the Mennonite Church USA, the United Methodist Church, the Episcopal Church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and the Reformed Church in America. They all have run into this, and they have all tried to make it work, and it doesn't work, because if these are mutually exclusive views here. And maybe it's not popular to say that, but I truly believe that if you look at these positions on paper, the other side is not just mistaken, they are gravely wrong. And this is not, being gravely wrong is not sustainable in one church.
There's two things I want to pursue with this. The first one,
Okay.
let's talk about why, how, and I'm not challenging you in this. I'm saying map out for me a little bit more why, and I'm not challenging, because the track record bears your point. Because in most cases we have seen that denominations can't share this view well. A split inevitably comes. There's something about this issue where, and now I want to sort of pursue it a little bit more. Can you not have this conflicting view in a local church? Can you not have this conflicting view at a synodical level? Can you not have it? I mean, what about this issue makes what sort of, let's say, ecclesiastical life untenable?
Let's see, there's a lot that could be said here.
Oh yeah.
I I'll just dive in. I think you have two fundamentally different views on the authority of Scripture, what Scripture is saying. Theological anthropology, for example, if you believe LGBTQ is a valid identity created by God, part of the created order, then it's something like different color eyes or something like that. And then I'm somebody who's saying, if you have blue eyes, you can't belong to the church. I mean, how horrible would that be? But if this is, if LGBTQ is not, is a case of mistaken identity, if this is part of the fall, then we have a situation where church discipline needs to be applied. And I think that I keep going back to that. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a Christian? Is LGBTQ part of my Christian identity? Or is it part of my fallen identity that I need to work through and be sanctified from? This is a primary issue. This is not secondary. And yeah, you put these on paper, we are going to be calling each other to repentance constantly. We are going to be angry with each other constantly. And if you look at what people have said to one another and about one another in other denominations, it gets nasty. It gets vicious because of the differences.
Now, there are, obviously there are significant differences between Christian traditions. Obviously, the Protestant Reformation was a significant departure, significant fight over a variety of issues, sacraments, images, church structure, the idea of the priesthood of all believers versus, let's say, the church is sort of embodied in a structure of set apart persons, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're in a point now where we have seen, at least in my lifetime, and I suspect probably all the way back to the Reformation, unprecedented levels of cooperation between Protestants and Catholics. I'll give an example. The Pleasant Street Christian Reformed Church, which is in Whitensville, Massachusetts, where my mother is from, and she currently lives and goes there. And they are right across the street from the Roman Catholic Church. And when I was growing up, one of my cousins did marry a girl from the Roman Catholic Church. When I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, it was an item of a lot of concern that Christian Reformed youth marry Christian Reformed youth, and Christian schools helped a lot with that. And Calvin College helped a lot with that, and that's that whole circulatory system that sort of kept everything moving in the Christian Reformed Church. Today, the kinds of things that would make my grandfather, that would have been unthinkable, I think, in some ways to my grandfather. For example, there are sometimes, I think there's a community Thanksgiving service in Whitensville in which the different churches right there in town take turns hosting that Thanksgiving service. Now, Thanksgiving, even though it's in the church order as a holiday that churches should recognize, not exactly an ecclesiastical holiday. So, Thanksgiving's sort of a nice borderline here. What do you think? Why have we been able to sort of lower some of our defenses against, let's say, Roman Catholics, Baptists, especially Reformed Baptists? Christian Reformed Church still continues to maintain, unlike the Reformed Church in America. I did a project with a Reformed Church in America pastor. He said, I haven't baptized a baby for 15 years. We just dedicate them. I thought, oh,
Wow.
not in the Christian Reformed Church, my friend.
Nope.
Word gets out at classes, I'm dedicating babies, and I think I can expect some church visitors.
Yep.
So given the fact that many other issues that historically the Christian Reformed Church has done a lot of policing in, the denomination has certainly relaxed itself on. Why this issue now? Is there something particular about human sexuality? Is there something else about this issue because it so deeply gets into intergenerational family connections? I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, or if you could flesh that out. At least you're not speaking for Abide, you're not speaking for anybody else, you're just speaking your thoughts. And again, what we share on YouTube, like we like to say on Voices, I mean, this is, I'm not going to hold you to this. I'm asking you to think out loud. And I want people to hear you to say, I'm thinking out loud.
Okay. So is the question,
or you can make it harder if you want to. You could say, I believe none other. You can do that too if you want.
Yeah. So is the question, why can we get along with Catholics so well now, as opposed to the past, whereas we can't even get along with each other?
It's also the question of, because I asked Clay Leibolt about, okay, so I don't see, and I believe this for a long time, I don't see any other path forward except some sort of separation. I think and after Synod 2022, that was abundantly clear. And I actually think a separation is healthy, because when I listen to people on the affirming side, as you said, and this is why I've been talking for over a decade about our need for a confessional conversation, because I believe there are issues beneath this issue. I mean, you mentioned a couple of them, but there are issues beneath this issue that the church has sort of forked on.
Indeed.
And we do need to talk about these underlying issues, because this issue on top, I think, is more a symptom than a cause of some things. But if that's true, and I think it is, we also have deep forks, historical forks in the church that we've been able to sort of make progress on. And it might be that this fork is just this, and that's just sort of human. So, people couldn't tolerate Baptists, they had to be killed. And there's a friend of mine, Sam Tiedemann, who's a biblical Unitarian. He's not UU. He keeps dreaming, I'm not UU. So he's in almost all respects sort of like a conservative evangelical, except he can't really subscribe to the doctrine of the Trinity. So we see all of this movement, and I guess part of my question with respect to this issue is, okay, what is it about this issue? Because I would imagine now that North Blendon is now becoming more of a suburban community, there will be there will be families led by two lesbians. And I mean, I know that some people think they want to sort of write you off as Hudsonville minister against same-sex marriage because he's never met a happy lesbian family. And I don't think that's true, because Hudsonville, Michigan, I'm sure has at least some of them there. And I'm certain they're perfectly nice and lovely neighbors and work well in the PTA. And many churches could use helpful, giving people who could come and be volunteers and all of that. But there's an issue with this issue that is really important for the church to. My argument has all along been we need to have much better conversations about this, because I don't think we're actually getting at a lot of the issues because they're big and scary. But this issue is obviously a hot point ecclesiastically. So any more thoughts about that? Why, when we've been able to sort of work with Baptists and work with Roman Catholics and in many ways even have better relations with unbelieving neighbors and the nuns, let's say NONES, why such a hard line on this issue?
This is where my timelines kind of come in handy.
Good. Bring it in.
So every time technology changes, society changes. So if you look at the first civilization began when written language started. That was in Sumer, Mesopotamia. And then the printing press was invented. And then that launched the Reformation. The Reformation couldn't have happened without the printing press. Now we have the internet, and information is more widely and readily available than ever before.
Sacramento and Hudsonville are this close right now.
We are. And so I really think that our entire society is in the midst of a shakeup, precipitated by some major events that were very formative in the boomer generation, and subsequently since then. And because these new issues, let's just kind of go with the sexual revolution, for example. Sexual revolution is based on some ideas that are very foreign to the biblical worldview. Sigmund Freud and Alfred Kinsey, Hugh Hefner, these were major players in the sexual revolution. And all of them were very anti-religion altogether. Because that philosophy has so thoroughly seeped into everyday life and everyday thought, among some other things, just individualism, human autonomy. This is, we don't think in groups anymore. Everybody's their own person. When I was growing up, we had one TV in the house, and we had to negotiate about what we were going to watch. We had one stereo in the house, and we had to negotiate what we were going to listen to. And now everybody has their own screens and their own headphones. We don't think in terms of groups anymore. And that bears out in denominations. The amount of Catholics that don't believe in transubstantiation is incredible. The amount of Catholics that don't believe in that do believe in justification by faith is incredible, and the amount of Protestants that don't believe in justification by faith is incredible. I could get you the sources if you want them. And so there's just this individualism. There's the sexual revolution. There are new ideas that if the Protestant Reformation was looking this way, we are now looking this way, and so that's why these issues are hitting every single religious Christian tradition. It's happening in Methodists and Episcopalians and the Reformed and the Lutherans, and the Catholics. We are in a very different time than 500 years ago, and the issues are very different now. And when you start with cutting things this way, and now we're cutting things this way, we can find ourselves in a lot more agreement with Catholics and Methodists and Lutherans than even people in our own denomination. And so your confessional conversation is badly needed because we are in very different times than we used to be.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about our confessions. And Our World Belongs to God is something that was written, came up in the 80s and 90s and quite well received. We've never sort of put it on the level of a confession. To what degree do you think we need new confessions or renewed confessions? For example, the Great Lakes Confession about human sexuality was written. Do you think the Christian Reformed Church would be well served to adopt a confession like that? What are your thoughts on how this conversation could be more intentionally confessional?
I guess, and I'm just going to speak for myself, I think that new confessions, catechisms would be really helpful, and I would expect them, new ones, to come together in this pivotal time in church history. At the same time, we're so individualistic, even as Christians. That's why denominations are in decline. Non-denominational churches are increasing. I mean, because we can't work together on on things. We're just too individualistic, and I lament that. I think that being individualistic is not the godly way. It's not the biblical way. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ is the biblical way. So we need to be working with other believers, members of one another, at least believers that where we have enough in common where we can work together. That needs to happen. So yeah, I lament the demise of denominations and the rise of non-denominational churches. But so in that sense, maybe any catechisms or confessions that would come out might not be as used or as useful because we're so individualistic. Yeah. But I do think that everything else considered, they're definitely needed. People need to know that people are asking different questions, and the Bible has answers for these questions. Just like the Bible had answers for the questions about salvation and what that meant, in the 1600s with the Remonstrants in the Netherlands, and during the Protestant Reformation. Okay, what does it mean to be saved? What is the role of the church, and how does that work? So the Bible can answer the questions of today, and organizing them into a catechism or a confession, I think would be very useful. Whether it would stick because we're so individualistic, that would be another conversation. There needs to be a reformation in terms of Christians' ability to work together.
Now, when I asked you the question first, there are two things. Now I'd like to follow the second route, because the statement you made on if you're wrong, if the affirmers are right and you're wrong, you made a pretty strong statement in terms of if I'm wrong, this is on a par with racism. And if that is true, what then else have we gotten wrong? Because I mean, and it would seem that the church has been wrong on this for 2,000 years. How would that color how we would see what on earth the church is if it could be wrong on something this foundation. Now, let me do a little bit of fleshing out with respect to racism. The kind of racism, I think racism is sort of a natural product of human bias. Babies, when they are born, before they are born, they're already imprinted by their mother and their father's voice in the womb. And so they are already biased towards their mother's voice, their mother's smell, their mother's look, et cetera, et cetera. If you live in a monoracial ethnic community, you will likely be biased towards those people. So on one hand, within just the way we grow up, there's already a vulnerability to racism. I'll put it that way, because we bias our own group as opposed to other groups who are potentially a threat. That being said, the kind of racism that, let's say, the United States had to deal with in the 19th and 20th centuries were, that slavery has gone extinct and been reinvented a variety of times in a variety of ways. And of course, the kind of chattel industrialized slavery that the South saw, and then that gets institutionalized in terms of African slaves as opposed to European indentured servants. I mean, there's a long specific history with respect to that. All that being said, while racism is easily a sin human beings can fall into by virtue of a biological bias that we must have in order to help children grow, you don't find the kind of racism that we found in America, in American history, in, let's say, the cosmopolitan world that Paul was in. And so racism doesn't really, our confession in dealing with racism doesn't in that way sort of put the Bible itself and the history of the church itself at risk. I mean, the Jew-Gentile thing wasn't technically really about racism in terms of black and white. That was very much about, a whole bunch of other things. But this issue of human sexuality, one of the things that, I often press others is, even, let's say, unlike women in office, where, there's these strange, was Junia a man or a woman? What about Lydia? You have cases in the New Testament and in the Old Testament when women are showing a degree of leadership and how to fill that out in the church. That's a long conversation. But you're just super hard pressed to make a biblical case for drawing an equivalence between heterosexual sexuality and same-sex sexuality. I'm not saying the case can't be made. That would be a stronger argument. I'm just saying that's a much harder case to make biblically than, let's say, women in ecclesiastical office, in my opinion.
I would agree.
So if, in fact, the church has been wrong about this for 2,000 years, what would that say to us? I mean, that would seem to me like and I think that's something, by as strongly as you made that point, that really stuck with me, because suddenly we would have to have a really profound conversation about both the practice of human sexuality in Israel and then the church through the ages. I mean, and that's sort of how I push back on, other than say, okay, I understand you're wanting to propose this change and, in a sense, a revolution. I think you're really going to have to work hard at, this is part of the reason I called for a confessional conversation. I think you're going to really have to do a significant retooling of a lot of things if you don't simply want to lose all of church history. Maybe I've just answered your question for you, and I'm going to get those comments, but I don't know. Does that make any sense to you, or does that ring true? Because
it really does.
You made a very strong statement.
I know people who have been called racists for agreeing with the HSR.
Oh yeah,
so
you just go to CRC Voices. You can read it. You can
and I'm
read
not
it
part
today.
of CRC Voices, but again, all things being equal, if you look at this viewpoint and if you look at the other one, it won't work. It won't work. You will be at each other's throats because somebody is egregiously wrong here. Somebody is terribly wrong. And to the point where this should not be tolerated in the church. something at the level of racism. We shouldn't be tolerating that in the church. So that's kind of why I made that comparison. Just if you believe that LGBTQ is a legitimate human identity, part of the created order, then to say that it's wrong is basically the equivalent of racism. Because green eyes, different skin colors, that's part of the created order, I would argue. And to say that you can't belong to our church because you have this skin color, no, that should not be tolerated. Anyways, they're moral equivalents. One thing that you talked about with respect to church history, I worked for a Jehovah's Witness for 2 summers, an elder in the Jehovah's Witness congregation, and he knew what he was talking about in a lot of ways, and so we would go back and forth on scripture and everything.
This wasn't in a church job. This was in a.
This was a summer job in between
Okay.
for the summers of seminary.
Okay.
I just started to get into Greek, and
just
he was
want to be
throwing Greek
clear
at
on
me.
this,
Oh,
that Aaron
thank you.
Vriesman doesn't have a hidden dual life with the Jehovah's Witnesses. Just making sure no rumors start.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But and this man is still a friend of mine. And I enjoy his company. But boy, when you throw out 2,000 years of church history, Jehovah's Witnesses is what you get. This Charles Taze Russell did exactly that. He was an anti-establishment person. He decided, you know what, forget all these churches, forget all creeds and confessions. I'm going to read the Bible for myself and come to my own conclusions. In a kind of in a sense of, I know better than everybody else. And Jehovah's Witnesses is what came out of that. Now, a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses would disown him or say he got something started, but we don't agree with everything he said. Fine. But that was where the movement started. And so ever since I've had these conversations with this Jehovah's Witness, and then since then discovering the gold of the creeds and confessions of the church, I've started to realize that, you know, I'm not, it's not just me and my Bible here. I need to interpret the Bible with believers going all the way back to the beginning. That interpretation of the Bible, I don't have a corner on that. As Paul says in 1 Corinthians, did the word of God originate with you, or are you the only ones it has reached? You know, I have to read the Bible with the rest of the church, worldwide and historical. And if I'm going to be going in a direction that they would not have gone, there's a lot of burden of proof for me to say, okay, 2,000 years of church history is wrong about Christ's divinity. That's a serious move for me to make, and I better be right about that. But I am more and more convinced that one thing that is a big problem in the world today, the Christian world today, is just kind of the me and my Bible mentality. I don't need creeds and confessions. I don't even need the church. And boy, do we need the church. Do we need the historical church and the worldwide church? And boy, can we find blind spots when we look at when we talk to one another, and when you read, you know, when you read Augustine or Calvin or the other church fathers and such. We need each other badly, so that we don't become a law unto ourselves in terms of scripture and interpretation. This is what Catholics pick on us about. You know, you exchanged one pope for everybody being a pope. And you know what? They're not wrong. In fact, when I'm in my theological discussion groups on Facebook, there's a lot of times I find myself siding with the Catholics against these evangelical, non-denominational, I have a corner on truth because I read the Bible kind of a thing. Um, again, has the word of God originated with you? Are you the only one it has reached? Do you think that you are wiser or more faithful or more devout than the people who have gone before you? Um, that's a not that 2,000 years of Christians are infallible. I'm not Roman Catholic in that way, but that is a serious claim to make when you are departing from the historic Christian position on something.
How do you think confessions can be helpful in a pluralistic world?
Oh, I like that question. Um, in a pluralistic world where um, it's kind of like in the days of the judges, where everybody does what's right in their own eyes. Confessions give me, at the very least, a place to start when how do I put the Bible together? You know, the Bible says a lot of things. Um, and if it was just me and my Bible, I could come to any number of conclusions. And being part of homeschool circles, being part of the anti-establishment circles, people go in all kinds of directions when it's just me and my Bible. We need confessions to root us into something that is bigger than just me and my wisdom and all of that and my experiences to guide how we understand scripture, and something that is bigger than just me. um and I wish that more people would see that, realize the value of being a part of something else and submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ in terms of the historic worldwide church. um and and just to recognize the value of that. um yeah, I don't know if I'm answering your question or
No,
not,
no,
but
it's a good answer. It's a good answer. And
okay.
and part of why my goal, most of my videos aren't CRC stuff. I CRC people who subscribe to my channel and think it's going to be CRC all the time are going to be, whoa, is this Jordan Peterson, John Vervaeke? He's friends with an Orthodox icon carver. Shouldn't he be smashing those things? But it's I I I think we desperately need to see if the practice confessions arose out of deep disagreements, often bloody and violent, with respect to foundational issues of what is true. And if we share this book with a lot of other people who use it and read it in different ways, it would seem to me that doing some intentional work with respect to, okay, what is this book? How do we read it? What are our presuppositions? What are our filters? What is our tradition? How do we manage disagreements? And it would seem to me that doing the work of having these conversations and putting pen to paper or fingers to keyboards in these days to better articulate perhaps what is inside us already or what we're learning from others. I mean, my argument in a lot of this has been I I was not surprised. I'm not surprised at the shape of the conflict in the Christian Reformed Church, and I'm not even surprised at the size of the two disputing groups. What has most surprised me and disappointed me has been how unprepared those who have wanted to change the policy in the Christian Reformed Church have with respect to, even if their goal is to convince the rest of the church that their position is the best one, and this is in fact what Christ calls us to do. I'm really surprised how poorly they've gone about their mission with respect to the rest of the church. And this is a group that likes to talk a lot about misuse of power. And this group of people has had a tremendous amount of power in the denomination. And, they've tended to be happy to win votes at synod. Now, the conservatives are now going to have exactly the same temptation. And they ought to take, having been on the losing end of how many synodical votes, they should remember what it's like to lose and figure out and have extend the same kind of mercy that they wish had been extended to them, and perhaps was. I don't want to paint this in too broad a picture, but I do think confessions could be a very helpful tool. And I actually think that confessions arise and are it's sort of an analogous way to which canonicity is discovered and embraced. I mean, people often in YouTube debates want to say, who picked the Bible? There's some committee behind closed doors and they're, smoking cigars and let's get Second Peter in there quick a minute.
Yeah,
we
right.
like spirits in prison.
Mhm.
No, and I think Calvin nicely talks about over time, something like the Heidelberg Catechism, for example, it was written for a specific context, but over time, groups in other contexts began to read it and say, wow, this really works. And yeah, there might be things that I don't know if I would have exactly said it that way, but I know what they're pointing to. And I really want to sort of be with this group of people
Yes.
as they continue this path towards glory and hear this inheritance we've received to work this inheritance. And again, as confessionally we say, our confessions are not at the level of Scripture. They're
No.
subject to Scripture. They're even subject to the church. We can vote them up or down.
Yep.
But these are, if we think about them as tools, not just tools for in terms of our own piety and our own devotions, that's fine. Not just tools in terms of teaching the church and perpetuating ideas within the church, that's fine. But also tools in contexts of conflict, where we can say, I'm going to put my cards on the table. Here are my cards. Let's show me your cards. And you can ask me hard questions about, and now that I'm in this much broader internet space, I get lots of hard questions that can be scary. My friend who's a Unitarian is not dumb, and he knows a
No.
lot of church history. And you don't just walk into a debate with him about Christology and the Trinity unprepared, because he has done his homework. And
Yes.
the same is true. And the arguments for the church saying, look, how on earth can you're just being cruel to these people who have, suffered at the hands of heterosexual people for a great deal of time. And they haven't asked for a particular attraction or orientation. And now you're denying them the blessings that heterosexuals have had, yada, yada, yada. So I think, again, confessions are potentially tools that we can use to say, okay, we've got a difference that at least some among us feel is a serious difference. Maybe through confessions and perhaps even through structures, we can have a conversation that, well, we might wind up on the other side of this line, as we do many times throughout church history, other side of the baptism line, other side of lines with respect to all sorts of things. We can at least understand each other and maybe even bless each other in ways that we can in good conscience, because that's what I want to do. And I don't know. And so I would think that confessions potentially could be useful in this process, because we have had a lot of division in Protestant churches. We've had the Protestant Reform split. We've had the women in office split, and we're about likely to have the same-sex marriage split. And I would like us to not repeat. I would like us to not add sin already on top of misery, which is what I am afraid we are about to do. So there's my little speech.
Something that is really important to me in all of this is that I'll just speak for myself, that I maintain the fruit of the Spirit in all of this. And I do believe that we are in a major conflict here, but it is so important that we do not fight like the world fights. It is so important that we exhibit Christian character the whole time. It's so important how we use our words, what we say and what we don't say. Um, we need to be constantly exhibiting love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. that needs to be what we do. And it's hard, when you're at Synod and you're exhausted, and it's been 6 days of lots of debates and late nights, and
Senate, Senate is, boy, Senate is hard work. It really is.
it's rough, and I usually don't sleep well those weeks either. So by
But
the
the
end, I'm
dorm bed
exhausted.
doesn't bring back fond memories,
Yes,
especially in July when it can get hot and humid in Grand Rapids.
indeed. Uh, yes, but that's hard to do. There's always a temptation for all of us to resort to the flesh, and to fight with the weapons of the world, which you can see in our political conversations all the time. I've really tried to retreat from the political world because I'm just so sick of it.
You're with a lot of
And
Americans, including myself. It's like, oh
okay,
gosh,
it just,
is
I
this
mean, I
how we're
see
going to run the
headlines.
country? All right.
Yeah, I just can't. Yeah. Anyways, it's so important that as we fight, we exhibit the fruit of the Spirit. That as we draw boundaries, that we do so out of love, and that we maintain joy instead of bitterness, that we maintain peace instead of hostility. Just how do and how exactly do we do that in each situation? That's going to be difficult to navigate, because there will be times when the flesh will creep up, that frustration will get the better of us, and long standing differences will build, and so it's important that I and all of us maintain the fruit of the Spirit in all of this.
You are not a delegate to Senate 2024?
Not this year, no. I was the last 2 years.
What are hopeful outcomes for you for Synod 2024?
I would hope that, more broadly speaking, that everybody realizes that we can't continue together as we are, and that there needs to be some sort of separation, and that the discussion would be, how can we do so in the most amicable way possible? Because this is not going to work. The better together philosophy frustrates me more than even all one body and the Hesed project, because I think it's the better together philosophy that is prolonging the pain and the suffering and the frustration when it doesn't need to be. And so my hope is that we realize this isn't going to work. Let's find a way to go our separate ways. We don't have to be nasty to each other. We're not looking to take anyone's pension away, or anybody's livelihood away, or anybody's property and buildings away, but we need to separate. Let's talk about how do we do that well. That would be an answer to prayer for this Synod.
What do you think? What with respect to the gravamen question?
The gravamen question, that one, I have stronger opinions on discipline than on gravamen. The gravamen question, I think, has been a loophole that has been created that is, again, prolonging the difficulties that we're going through, and it allows people to just try to sweep differences under the rug that can't be swept under the rug. And so the the gravamen is really trying to prolong the inevitable. Well, let's just pretend like we're in agreement with everything and we are on the same page with things. So I hope that I hate guess I hope that the gravamen issue can be settled in terms of, oh boy, how do I word this well? I'm going to let Senate do the wording. How about
Okay.
that?
All right. That's fine.
But I do believe that gravamen has been kind of come out of nowhere as a loophole for people who want to just pretend like everything is fine, and that is prolonging the difficulties that we're going through.
Well, we've been at this for an hour and 45 minutes, and I've been driving the show here, and you've been very gracious in terms of answering my questions and sharing yourself with a YouTube audience. Do you have anything you want to ask me, or anything that you want to say that I haven't given you the opportunity to say?
Yeah. If the CRC splits, how will you handle that? Which how will you sort out where you're going to go? Are you going to stick with the CRC? Are you going to go with those who have different ideas on marriage and sexuality? What how are you looking at this?
I will stay with my local church, and I'll stay with my Classis. I don't anticipate my Classis splitting or leaving. And I don't anticipate anything in my local church. I get a sense, my sense is that my council in my local church is, to the degree that it's aware, happily located in our Classis and happily located in the denomination. Now, I don't know that my when you get further away from sort of the center of the CRC and you get fewer and fewer people who have CRC roots in your church, the church tends to get often sort of kind of a broadly evangelical group. And there are a lot of people on the West Coast who are nervous about the gravamen question, because there are a lot of people on the West Coast who maybe don't necessarily have an issue over the human sexuality question, but you've got office bearers who have questions about infant baptism, or questions about double predestination, or some of these kinds of things. And so the gravamen loophole has been used for a lot of different reasons and a lot of different purposes throughout the church. And it's really important to not make law too strict as a result of one particular conflict, when the application of that law tends to be very, very broad in terms of office bearers in the church. So, and I don't expect any shake up here in my Classis or in my local church with respect to this. One of the issues that I think Kent was on my conversation with his uncle Clay. It's so funny that they're related. Kent Hendricks recently wrote a piece that I want to make a video about the moderates, because he has a point. Right now in the Christian Reformed churches, there are a few churches that are feeling a lot of conflict over this issue, because maybe the local church council has taken a stand, and not everybody in the church likes the stand that their council made. And then there are churches that are a larger group of churches that are very animated about this because they want something to be done. There is a significant number of churches that are sort of split and moderate on this issue, that are not talking about this locally, partly just because the church overall is comfortable with the position of the denomination, and there might be a number of individuals in the church that aren't comfortable with it and would like to see the church change, but they've long since made peace with the fact that they go to a church that is more conservative on some issues than they are. And that's fine for them. And the church knows it within themselves, and they're sort of fine with it. And so they're not having a lot of seminars or anything on this issue, basically because why start a fight locally that isn't going to make any difference anywhere? And so I think at the synodical level, there's going to definitely be things are going to happen, decisions are going to be made, there will be some sort of separations, will be inevitable. But for those moderates that are living sort of in a mixed group that are kind of quiet about it, figuring out how to go forward with that is important, because that's actually a lot of the church. And when people come to me and they say, well, why don't the conservatives leave? Why, and I would say, well, because we wouldn't be looking at maybe losing 30 to 50 churches. We'd be looking at losing 300 to 500 churches if it was the other way. That's why this system is giving the kinds of outcomes it's giving. Yet, that question of this issue is not going away. And again, that's why I think if those on the affirming side of the denomination want to actually bless this denomination that they might be forced out of, they should think about, how they can in fact help others. And that's a complex thing. And part of this is complex with respect to Calvin University, with respect to pensions, with respect to other agencies. But again, my admonition for them is, I think most of the let's call them confessionalists in the denomination aren't looking for blood or a pound of flesh. And I think a lot of people will try to be as flexible as possible with respect to practicalities and institutions. So I hope something can come out of this that will be more creative and productive than what we saw with the URC or the Protestant Reformed split back in the 1920s. That's my soapbox. And I'm hoping that leadership will emerge and we can work on that. But no, me, I'm not going anywhere.
Okay.
My church isn't going anywhere. My Classis isn't going anywhere. We've had almost no discussion of this at Classis. Again, partly because of the fact that we know that, well, for the most part, we're pretty conservative on this matter. And those who are more progressive on this matter want to be a part of this church, even though it's conservative. They don't want to rock the boat. And that's where the gravamen thing makes them a little nervous. I think for every gravamen that's actually filed, there are probably dozens that are silent. They're like, I'm not going to file papers. I'm not necessarily going to talk about what I think, but I'm going to go along to get along and just keep my mouth shut at places. And I think that's a dynamic in which treating gravamen as sort of a goat gate, it's binary, it's in or out, instead of something that looks more to process and formation and actually facilitating conversation. That's because I don't think we're going to deal with those CRC moderates with the gravamen issue. We have to think a lot more about, okay, how do we live as a denomination in a world now in two nations that have legalized same-sex marriage? And regardless of who wins the White House this year, I don't think that's getting overturned anytime soon.
No.
So we, the winners of this fight, the curse of winning is that you no longer bear the wisdom earned from losing. And those who have been winning the votes in the last few years learned a lot of wisdom from losing for decades. Now it's helpful to not forget that wisdom and to, as you said, if you lose your soul in winning this fight, you have gained nothing. So no, I'm
Yes.
not going anywhere. My church isn't going anywhere. My Classis is, if my Classis did go somewhere, my church would probably go with my Classis. And I think that's true of most churches that are sort of moderate CRC churches in that way.
Yeah. No. You've talked about confessional conversation for quite a while now. I remember you talking on Returning Church years ago already about this, maybe 10 years more, maybe more
At least.
And how do you envision something like that actually going? Are you expecting or hoping for a synod where we everybody puts all their cards on the table, and we just have a synod devoted to a confessional conversation? Are you what do you envision for this confessional conversation?
Well, we are having it now.
Okay.
And if you look at the history of the church, confessional conversations are seldom neat and orderly and tidy and feel good events. They are fights. And, you know, the Belgic confession arises out of, you know, one guy saying, I'm a Christian too. Please don't kill us. This is what we think. You know, Spain, don't hunt us down. So this is, fortunately, we're not in that now, but we are having it. And like I said, confessions, I think the formal confessions emerge long term. You know, if the Great Lakes Confession on human sexuality sort of continues to grow, or if someone reads it and sort of forks it, it's also different now that we are doing confessional conversations in an internet age and not just merely in a print age. And so how those, and so I've been making an argument that when, let's say, a church puts up an affirming statement on their website, that is a confessional move. Now, most of those statements aren't terribly worked through. And in fact, many statements of faith that you find on church websites are, you know, a lot of confessionality is sort of cut and paste now. Oh, that looks good. Let's put that on our website. And it's clear we're going to have to go to a deeper level. And I think that if in fact, the ball with respect to, my biggest frustration has been conservatives haven't necessarily had to do a lot of confessional work because they're not proposing a change. Now, there's been, you know, obviously a fair amount of theological work that's been done. There's been some books that are written, but writing a book arguing for the validity, the validity of same-sex marriage in a Christian thing is not the same as a community working on a confession. Confessions are shorter than books, but they're more detailed than, you know, 2 paragraphs on a church webpage with a rainbow heart. Because, you know, as we've said, and as I've said before, the women in church office, I'm very glad that the Christian Reformed Church at that point said, this isn't a confessional matter. We said that fairly early on. We might have said it too fast. And my biggest disappointment with what happened with the women in church office fight was that we stopped actually processing when we arrived at a political solution. And the fact that we have both complementarians who aren't terribly happy with how they've been treated and women who aren't always happy with how they've been treated is a sign that, you know what, we sort of grabbed for a pragmatic solution for this. And okay, it's worked well in terms of getting some stuff off of the synodical docket. But there are a lot of deep issues about male and female. And you know, before the change was made, the progressives were willing to go into those issues, but after they won, the winners then tend to be like, let's shut the door on this. We're not going to talk about this anymore. Now, you have another issue that is our practice of synodical reports the best way to have confessional conversations. I don't think it's bad. I remember reading the Human Sexuality Report for the first time and thinking, boy, this is such a Christian Reformed synodical report. They all read the same. It's long, and they've been getting longer. You know, I really love what Kent Hendricks is doing in terms of looking at Christian Reformed history, because he's looking through different lenses, because he's like, boy, that Acts of Senate is really getting fat, and these reports are really getting long. And, well, yeah, thank word processors. But the issue with that is, as the reports get longer, the breadth of readership gets shorter, and people are now operating much more on a mimetic level. You know, it's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. That's a mimetic level that, okay, I understand it's a slogan. The solas are slogans too. The solas aren't really doctrines. If you really want to do confessionality on the solas, you're going to have to say a lot more. But part of this is figuring out, in this age, the right amount to say and how to say it. And confessional conversations actually take a very long time. And I think we're in the midst of it. It isn't, and that's why, although I agree with you that as much as I'd love to not see a split in the Christian Reformed Church, I think one is inevitable. And I'd like, if we do have a split, to have it be a productive split. At the same time, what Better Together wants to do, hopefully, in terms of getting people to talk across divides, is a healthy thing. And I actually think that that's probably best done in sort of a church adjacent sort of way, or maybe in a between church sort of way. Before the Reformed Church of America sort of fragmented, I mean, we were having some I enjoyed the projects where I'd work with the Reformed Church in America because I could learn from them, and I think they could learn from the Christian Reformed Church. If there's a split, those who remain can learn from those who depart, and those who depart can learn from those who remain. And because of, as we talked about in the initial parts of this conversation, the Christian Reformed Church in many ways is a big extended family. I'd rather have a thing that people can sort of, resettle along these lines. I recently had, he never formally joined my church because he has two of his three children are gay, and he loved this church. He gave faithfully to this church. He was never an office bearer. He wasn't here that long, but he said, I probably can't join a church that isn't affirming, but I love you and I love this church, but I probably can't be a member. And that was absolutely fine. And in other ways, he was a deeply Christian Reformed man. And so all of these particularities get worked out in individuals, and we're just going to have to figure out how structures and the things that structures confess, because if we think about the Christian Reformed Church as a body, confessions are sort of its speech. And so we're doing the work now. And so I want these conversations that I do with people on the different sides to be at least part of that. So, okay, we're not going to deal with straw men, but we're going to actually understand each other. And I really love the fact that you talked about what happened in Classis, because, okay, well, maybe a local option doesn't work. Maybe we need a synodical option. And then let's figure out how we then go forward from there and not raise so much enmity that both sides are just like, good riddance. You kicked me out, you'll see no more of me. No, I don't want that. I don't want that. Uh-oh. Oh no. Hudsonville and Sacramento got further away. Oh, you're back. Good.
Okay.
You're frozen.
You froze for a minute too. So
all
okay.
Right. So yeah, that's where I'm at in this.
Okay. And that makes sense. And if you look at, I mean, how long did it take for the church to sort out certain things? It took centuries in some cases.
And I think we should think in those timelines with respect to this, even though we live in the now and people live in the now.
Yes. No. No, that's interesting because, as you said, this topic, this difference is symptomatic of bigger theological differences, and it would be great if we could have a conversation about, the authority of Scripture and how that and hermeneutics and these sorts of things, because it gets manifested in a lot of different ways besides this, and it results in a lot of frustration, and we need to be of one mind on core issues or we can't do effective ministry together.
Yeah. And that's, when I've been watching the last two synods, and it's funny because people, well, let's talk about pastoral care. And it's like, well, depending on where you're at with respect to this issue, your pastoral care is going to look very, very different. Pastoral care isn't just synonymous with nice. Pastoral care is built on an assessment, the theological assessment of a situation, and you act from that basis. And so you don't resolve this with nice.
Absolutely.
That's just not it's just illegitimate. It's not competent.
Absolutely.
So
That's one thing I appreciated about the philosophy classes, is that it had you respond to arguments. Okay, somebody is making an argument, or you're presenting an argument. People are going to be coming at you with all these counterexamples or other things like that. You need to be able to formulate an argument. And I don't think people know how to do that anymore. I think
no.
that
And most people can't do it well anyway and never could.
Okay, I mean, I could be open to that, but I mean, if you plop down an atheist in front of me, I'd be like, all right, let's have a conversation. You know,
Yeah.
let's talk about this. But I wouldn't be just immediately intrinsically offended. It's like, okay, well, let's talk about what you believe. I'll tell you what I believe, and we can debate this.
There's set and setting to that.
Yes, for sure.
Well, I've got a dog that's going to have to be attended to. My wife and I have been raising a service dog. Hopefully she'll graduate, and she's a super smart dog, but she sits here in a kennel with me in the office. But I can't
Nice.
go too many hours with her, just poor soul being there listening to me. She's gotten quite an education in the year that she's been with us, but anyway. So
Nice.
Aaron, I really appreciate you giving me the time and you being brave enough to come out into YouTube land and share your story and share your thoughts. I'll probably take some clips of this and post them to my channel, and
Okay.
then the whole thing will be available in about a week or so. And yeah, and I hope that our conversation helps in some way.
Yes. And I have my own YouTube channel. I put all my sermons on there and
Oh,
stuff
okay.
like that. I don't have as many subscribers as you do or anything, but
Well, I'll put
yeah,
the link to
so
that
it's not too,
below. So if people want to
oh
hear
yeah,
more, then they can find you.
that would be wonderful.
So email me the link or any other church website or any other links you'd like me to include. And if people want to, because often what happens is that you're on my channel, and then, well, you might get other invitations from other channels to come and talk about
Okay.
other things. So, and it
That's
sounds like
fine.
you make timelines and you like philosophy and you're homeschooled. So there will be people that find connections in there and say, I want to talk to that guy. So,
Yes. No, that'd be great. I will email you some links then.
okay,
So
real good.
thanks a lot, Paul.
Thank you, Aaron. It's great
Good
talking to
talking
you.
to you.
All right. Bye-bye.